So John chapter 3, we want to look around verse 26 or so. And I'm actually probably going to back up to verse 22. John chapter 3, verse 22. After this, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside, and he remained there with them and was baptizing. John also was baptizing in Aenon, near Salim, because water was plentiful there, and the people were coming and being baptized. For John had not yet been put in prison. Now, a discussion arose between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. And they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he's baptizing, and all are going to him. John answered, a person cannot receive even one thing unless it's given him from heaven. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore this joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, but I must decrease. So let's talk about the circumstances here for a moment. John has been working for some time. He's been preaching. His message can be boiled down to one simple statement. Anybody remember what it is? Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's essentially what he said. Now, I believe his sermons were a lot longer than that. And I believe that he made arguments from the prophets and explained the prophets to people and were doing the very thing that God sent him to do, which was to prepare the way for the coming of the Lord. But that message essentially is it's time to change because the kingdom is here. And he's out here working, and he's baptizing these folks, and like many people, and by the way, this is a problem that goes all the way up until the present day. Like many people, success by those who were working with John was measured by what? There are two things in this text that tells me what John's assistants were concerned about. How many people they were baptizing compared to other people. And so when Jesus and his disciples began to baptize more than them, that was bothersome. And the second one is directly connected to it, and that is what? How many people in general are coming to them to be taught? And so let's notice it again. They came to him, verse 26, and said, Rabbi, that's teacher, he who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness. That's talking about Jesus. Look, he's baptizing, and all are going to him. So they come to John, their teacher, and they say, he's stealing all your thunder. You were nice enough to endorse him when we were on the other side of the river. You said nice things about him. And now he's baptizing folks, and everybody's going to him instead of to you. And so they were really concerned about that. And they were asking him about that circumstance. And John begins to explain some things to them. A person cannot receive even one thing unless it's given to him from heaven. So the first thing I got to consider is anything that I have to do that's good or that's right or that's honorable, anything that I am blessed with, any power or authority that's given to me, where does it come from? It comes from God. So that ought to dictate when and how I use it, right? Let's take this away from the role of rabbi that John has and put it in the role of political leader like Joseph. Someone rises up to political power and they get to the point where, in Joseph's case, with the exception of Pharaoh himself, Joseph had absolute autonomous control. He could do anything he wanted to do. But how did he get that power? How did Joseph get to that position and have all that power given to him? Was it because Joseph was so great? It's okay. You can answer. It really, Joseph was a bright guy. But even the information that he had that impressed Pharaoh so much and that caused Pharaoh to give him the authority that he had, even that information, where did Joseph get it from? From God. Where does all authority come from? From God. Even those who rise up into positions of power in the political realm get their authority from God. Romans 13. These people are brought into power because God allows them to be brought into power. And God grants for them to have this authority to exercise. And that's essentially what John is saying here. A person cannot receive even one thing unless it's given to him from heaven. I don't get to use this however I want to use it and do with it what I want to do and build myself up with it and make more of myself. This was given to me by God, and I have to use it the way that He wants it used. Law number 1 is what? Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind. And the second is like unto it, love your neighbors yourself. First off, I use this authority to please God. Secondly, I use it to do what? To benefit the people around me. So, that's his first response. Secondly, he says, you yourselves bear me witness that I said I am not the Christ. You were there, you heard it, you can actually testify. I've been preaching all along that I am not the Messiah. I'm not the chosen one. That's essentially what John's followers were wanting, was for John to be the deliverer. And John said, you yourselves bear witness to the fact that I've been saying all along, I'm not the Christ. I've been sent before him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. Now, this is figurative language. But the groom is the groom, and the best man is just the best man. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. In other words, John said, look, I'm not jealous about Jesus. I'm not jealous that he is speaking. I'm not jealous that his time has come. I'm not jealous that people are going to him, because he's the focus of the day. He's the reason I'm here. He's the reason I was given the authority that I was given and the task that I was given to do. And so, I'm not jealous of him. I rejoice. My joy is now complete. Because the one that I was paving the way for has arrived and begun to teach. He must increase. I must decrease. That right there, that is the golden rule put into force. When someone rises to a position of power, what do they tend to try to do? Well, yes, that happens. Keep it. That's rule number 1, keep my power. And usually the decision is made that the best way that I can keep my power is to do what? Increase my power. I'm trying to get bigger and stronger and get so big and so strong that no one can touch me. That is what every dictator in the history of the world has done. Sought to have the biggest army with the biggest following and the biggest guns so that no one can take their power from them. And to put as many people between them and their competitor as possible so that everybody else can be reached before I can be reached. So that I'm left standing at the end. If I'm left standing, then I still have my position in power. But instead, John says what? He must increase and I must decrease. This is exactly the opposite of the way that the human behavior pattern manifests itself. John is happy to relinquish his authority. happy to relinquish his power, happy for his disciples to go and become disciples of Jesus. He's happy to decrease. It's time for that. But let me tell you what, it's hard. It's hard to get someone who has, even if it's just a little small measure of authority given to them, to get them to relinquish that authority. Even in our society where we don't actually have lifetime appointed dictators that assume to power by force, we have elected officials. Even they don't tend to resign their authority too quickly. In fact, the only president that has resigned that I know of in my lifetime only did it why? He only did it because it was very clear that he was going out anyway. And he could keep a little bit of his influence and power if he resigned instead of having it stripped completely from him and being completely a laughingstock. That's ultimately what happened. His friends came to him and said, look, this is going to happen, and there's nothing that can be done about it. And he said, okay, then maybe I can hold on to some dignity and influence by resigning instead of allowing myself to be kicked out of office. It's really, really hard to take someone who has even a little bit of power given to them and find them saying, that's fine, it's time for me to go. We have had a few leaders like that, though. George Washington was one of those guys. They were ready to make him a king, and he refused. And they would have elected him president. At the time, there wasn't even any term limits. They would have continued to elect him president until he died. They may have elected him after he died. But after 8 years, you know what he said? I'm going home. Let someone else do this. And that became a pattern until the 30s. And then, even here in the U.S., leaders started acting like people generally act, which is once I get a little bit of power, I want more of it. And I will hang on to it as long as I can. And you'll pull it out of my hands kicking and screaming. But not John. When John's disciples came to him going, we got to do something about this. This guy that you mentioned over there on the other side, he's drawing bigger crowds than you. John said, that's the way it's supposed to be. And I'm going to continue to decrease, and he's going to increase. And can you imagine what kind of a shock that was to these disciples of John to hear such a thing? What a lesson. What a great lesson to teach. And it all started with the statement, a person cannot receive even one thing unless it's given from heaven. And so all we are is stewards of what we have. And that's why husbands shouldn't abuse their authority over their wives, and parents shouldn't abuse their authority over their children. That's why elders shouldn't abuse their power over the church. That's why leaders shouldn't abuse their power over cities and states and nations. Because they should understand that the only reason I have this authority is because it's been entrusted to me, and I have a trust now that I have to exercise this to the well-being not of myself, but of others, and I can only hold on to this and use it for as long as it's beneficial and profitable for others. And when it ceases to be good, then I must decrease. And that's understood. And he stands as a great example. So what all these guys have in common, Joseph, Samson, Nehemiah, and John, what they all have in common is that they used the authority that was given them by God to serve others, not to serve themselves. And they exemplify what it means to live what we call the golden rule when you are in a position of authority over other people. Now, do we have negative examples? Yeah, we got a bunch of them. We're not going to look at all of them, but we are going to look at a few. And so let's turn back to 1 Kings chapter 21. Now, Naboth, the Jezreelite, had a vineyard in Jezreel beside the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. And after this, Ahab said to Naboth, "Give me your vineyard, that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it's near my house, and I'll give you a better vineyard for it, or if it seems good to you, I'll give you its value in money." But Naboth said to Ahab, "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers." And so this was not just a piece of property to Naboth. This was the property that God had given his family. And you'll recall from the history, as the people went into the land and took possession of the land, God divided the land up and said, okay, this section belongs to this house, and this section belongs to this house. And he broke it down by families. And there were all kind of rules that would eventually, even if I had to at some point sell my property, eventually, you know what happened? It eventually reverted back to the family that was supposed to own it. And that's what he's talking about. Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my father. This belongs to my family. It was given to us by God. Ahab went into his house vexed and sullen because of what Naboth the Jezreelite had said to him, for he said, "I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers." And he lay down on his bed and turned away his face and would not eat food. Now, let's talk about this for just a moment. Ahab is who again? He's the king. What do kings usually have? Besides the fact that they have funny little hats that make people go, hey, there's the king, they also usually have what? Palaces, right? And land and money and people serving them and pretty much anything they want. So does Ahab need that property? Now, Naboth, it's the only thing that he has. And it's a vineyard, and that means that Naboth, for his living, was a vine dresser. And so this is his entire life. This is his inheritance from his fathers. This is what his family's always done. This is where they've always done it. And they have a vineyard, and he's the caretaker of the vineyard. And Ahab doesn't need it. Ahab just wants a vegetable garden close to his house. Yeah, he didn't need that land. He just wanted that land. And do you notice how he acted when he got told no? He went home, he crawled into bed, he turned and faced the wall, and he pouted like a little 3-year-old and refused to eat. Jezebel, his wife. And yes, that's the Jezebel. Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said to him, "Why is your spirit so vexed that you can eat no food?" And I'm going to say something real quick here. His spirit wasn't so vexed that he could eat no food. He got himself worked up in a tizzy and wouldn't eat any food. He didn't have any reason to be in the condition he was in, other than the fact that he just didn't get his way. "Because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, 'Give me your vineyard for money, or else, if it please you, I'll give you another vineyard for it.' And he answered, 'I will not give you my vineyard.'" And Jezebel, by the way, there's a good story about human behavior here, right here too. Naboth gave an underlying principle as to why he was unwilling to engage in this deal, right? He said, "God forbid, because this is my inheritance land." Do you notice that he left that part of the story out? He says, well, I asked for it, and I tried to make a fair deal with him. I was going to pay him for it or give him another vineyard, but no, he just wouldn't give it to me. See, he told the story in the light that made it look worse on Naboth and best on him. That's what people do when they act the way that Ahab acts and when they live the way Ahab lives. Who's the only person that Ahab is concerned about? Ahab. It's the only person he's concerned about. Jezebel's wife said to him, "Do you not now govern Israel? Arise, eat bread, let your heart be cheerful. I'll give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite." So she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with a seal. She sent the letters to the elders and the leaders who lived with Naboth in his city. She wrote the letters, proclaim a fast, and set Naboth at the head of the people, and set two worthless men opposite him, and let them bring a charge against him, saying, "You have cursed God and the king." Then take him out and stone him to death. She's a winner, right? Hey, I tell you what. You don't worry about it, honey. I'll take care of things. You just go get some food and get yourself happy, and I'll take care of everything. I'm going to get you that vineyard that you want. And then she writes some letters. She creates a banquet for the sole purpose of inviting Naboth and having two unsavory individuals seated by him to make a false accusation against him so that she can have him killed. Is that using your position and authority to help people? Or is that simply using it to get what you want? Make yourself happy. The men of his city, the elders and the leaders who lived in his city, did as Jezebel had sent word to them, as it was written in the letters that she had sent to them. And I'm going to be mean to those people too. Listen, the elders of that city, you know what they should have done? They should have said, "No, this isn't right. We're not going to do it." Now, Jezebel had a reputation, and people that crossed Jezebel, what happened to them? They died. So would they have been putting themselves at risk by doing that? Yeah, but it still would have been the right thing to do. To not be willing to do evil. She's instructing them to murder someone. Do we have to do what people who have authority over us tell us to do when they instruct us to do things like murder? No, and in fact, what's the principle set forth in the Scriptures regarding that? Acts chapter 5, verse 29, we must obey God rather than men. Now, the latter part of that verse we don't talk about as often, but we need to. Because what they follow that up with is, you do to us whatever you think is right. And that means when I have that attitude, you know what? I can't do what you've instructed me to do because it's counter to the will of God and I must obey God. We also must carry with it the attitude of what? I'm willing to die if that's what need be happen. If that's what it costs me for doing what's right, then that's okay. That's what they should have done, but that's not what they did. They did what Jezebel asked them to do and began setting things up. They proclaimed a fast and set Naboth at the head of the people, and two worthless men came in and sat opposite him, and the worthless men brought a charge against Naboth in the presence of the people, saying, "Naboth cursed God and the king." So they took him outside the city and stoned him to death with stones. They sent to Jezebel, saying, "Naboth has been stoned, he is dead." And as soon as Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned and was dead, Jezebel said to Ahab, "Arise, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to give you for money, for Naboth is not alive, but dead." And as soon as Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, Ahab rose to go down to the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite to take possession of it. You know what Ahab should have done? What would be the right thing for Ahab to do in this situation? He's disappointed. He can't have what he wants. He's pouting in the corner. His wife says, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. You just go get you something to eat." Then she comes in later and says, "All right, he's dead." What should he have done? How did he die? What happened? And as soon as he found out what happened, what should he have done? He should have prosecuted his wife and the people who unjustly murdered someone. That was his job, right? God raises up civil authorities to do what? To be avengers against evildoers. That's his job. But does he do that? No, he goes down and takes possession of the vineyard because that's what he wanted. Do you realize that this was a king who didn't need this little piece of land, who just wanted this little piece of land, who was willing to allow someone to be murdered so that he could have what he wanted? Is that loving your neighbor as yourself? Is that doing unto others as you would have them do unto you? If the roles were reversed, if Ahab had someone come to him and said, I want you to vacate the castle because I want the castle, and he said, no, I can't do that. I've been made king by God. Would he have wanted this person to have him unjustly murdered so that they could take the castle from him? Is that how he would have wanted to have been treated? No. They went wrong. There's a whole other story in that too. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. What should he have done at that point? No, that's not your job. There's all kind of problems with this, but they really all center on one thing. Ahab is willing to do what? Use whatever he has at his disposal to make himself happy and get what he wants, instead of using the position that God has given him to serve other people and make them better. That's the big contrast. Joseph could have put his brothers to death, but he didn't. Instead, he gave them land, and he gave them food, and he took care of them. Samson could have been grumpy and mad because his eyes were put out and he was in prison and he had lost everything. But instead, he said, God, give me the strength one more time, just one more time, and I'm going to use it to do what? To deliver your people. I'm going to die here in this. And what the text says, this is a very important line in the Samson story, that he killed more people in his death than he ever had in his life. He had a bigger impact in delivering the people of God by dying for them than he ever had by living. That's service to others. Nehemiah the same way. John the same way. Not using these things to build for themselves a name and a reputation and influence and power that they can hold on to and wield over other people, but instead using whatever's given to them, saying, you know what, this has been given to me by God. You don't get anything unless God gives it to you, so I have to use it to serve Him, not myself. Ahab, quite the opposite. Ahab's only concerned with what he wants. And that's part of the reason, by the way, I think he ended up with a woman like Jezebel. Because she was a person who was willing to do whatever it took to get what she wanted.
Yeah, that's kind of strange. You go back all the way back up to the very beginning when he went to get the land, and he made him a pretty fair offer. But when he heard the reason, it wouldn't sell, and he wouldn't get it. He wouldn't do it, and thought it was against the law for him to give away his inheritance from his father. That's when no things should have been if he was the righteous king.
Yep, should have. Now, there's also one other way this story could be more redeeming than it is. This is not one of my negative examples. In fact, David's an example we could use for positive reasons. But there was an event in David's life where he did abuse his power and actually had someone killed, right? And if this story ended the way that one did, this could be a positive story too, because if you recall what David did when he was confronted with what he did, and he realized the great evil that he had done in abusing his position and power in that way, what did he do? He prostrated himself before God. He begged for God's mercy and forgiveness, and he lived the rest of his life seeking to not do things like that again. He repented. If Ahab had come to such a place and repented and changed and been transformed and began to live in order to serve and honor God, he wouldn't be on this list. But that's not what he did. He spent his whole life being an enemy of all things that were right. Trying to kill the prophets of God, let his wife kill most of them.
But in the end, he didn't. Well, toward the end of the chapter, he humbled himself before God.
Yeah, but it didn't last. Got a couple of more minutes. Go to Jeremiah 23. Jeremiah 23, we'll look at verses 1 through 6 at this point. This is just general. This is no particular leader. This is generally the leaders of Israel. Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture. That's how this starts. Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. Therefore, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, concerning the shepherds who care for my people, you have scattered my flock and have driven them away. That is the opposite of what a shepherd is supposed to do. Shepherd is supposed to care for the flock and keep them together. Instead, they've scattered the flock and driven them away. You have not attended to them. Behold, I will attend to you for your evil deeds, declares the Lord. I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries where I have driven them, and I will bring them back to the fold. They shall be fruitful and multiply. I will set shepherds over them who will care for them. They shall fear no more, nor be dismayed, neither shall any be missing, declares the Lord. This is what God says. You folks are evil, and you've done evil to my people, and they've been scattered because of that. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring them all back together and replace you. I'm going to put people in the positions that you're now in who will actually care for them and do what they ought to do. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as a king and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell securely, and this is the name by which he will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. Who's Jeremiah talking about, by the way? This is messianic in its nature. He's talking about Jesus and Jesus rising up to deliver and to save everyone. But I want us to see that Israel's leaders were not using the authority that God gave them for the purposes that he gave it to them. He had given them the authority to care for his people and to attend to his people. And instead, they had abused that authority. And instead of leading the people the way that they ought to, they had scattered the people and sought to destroy them. Israel's leaders were not always good. As we move forward, we're going to look at Ezekiel 34 and Isaiah chapter 1 and 2 Chronicles 36, some more examples of the prophets being sent and talking about such problems with Israel's leadership. We're going to look at some proverbs about the abuse of authority and some other examples from the Scripture that will help us understand the negative ways in which people can use the authority. Listen, as parents, we don't have authority over our children so that we can make our life what we want of it. So that I can be treated like a king and have someone to serve me and wait on me and do everything that I want them to do and not have to work anymore and put all the work on them. That's not what my authority over my children is about. It's okay to teach them, and it's okay to give them work to do, and it's okay to help them learn to show respect to those who have authority over them and all sorts of things, and jobs and all. That's all part of raising people up properly, teaching them to work hard, but not abusing them so that I get everything I want. That's not why I'm given that. Why am I giving the authority over them? To raise them up in the fear and admonition of God. I'm given authority over them to help them learn what they need to learn so that they can have a relationship with God. And if I don't use that authority for that end, guess what? It's going to happen. I'm going to have to answer to the Lord. Because He's the one that gave me the authority. That's where it came from. And so I need to use it for the Lord and for His purposes, not for myself and mine. Got to stop. Appreciate your presence this evening. We'll move on with this, Lord willing, next time. Thanks for the guys that are watching online as well.